The truth of widespread child abuse allegations across the country's public institutions. An inquiry which has already lost 3 chairpersons. Victims say it's devastating. So what does this mean for the future of this multi-million-pound, 2-year-long investigation? Here's our senior Home Affairs correspondent, Simon Israel.
Britain's largest ever public inquiry has yet again lurched into crisis. Its chief lawyer, Ben Emmerson QC, is now suspended, under investigation for what and for how long has not been disclosed, least of all, apparently, to him. Some survivors' groups describe it as a catastrophe.
It's devastating. And I will say this, when they had the investigation into Lambeth many years ago, when that failed, people committed suicide. This is how serious this is. And I just don't get that people are taking this seriously enough, that you're leading people to believe they're going to get justice. They're going back through their backstory, reliving the nightmares again, just to watch this farce. Awful.
Ben Emmerson's been described as a Goliath in the area of human rights. His CV certainly reflects that. A United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism, a British judge at the International Criminal Court. He defeated the UK government over detention without trial, and defeated the MOD over discrimination against homosexuals in the armed forces. So will the child abuse inquiry lose teeth if his suspension becomes dismissal?
I just hope that if, God forbid, that is to happen, that a replacement is found. This inquiry is by no means just about one person or a handful of people. It's a massive undertaking.
This evening things got even worse when it emerged that another of the inquiry's lawyers, Elizabeth Prochaska, a colleague of Mr. Emmerson's, had quit. And amid this turmoil, an inquiry statement attempted to reassure all those it was set up to help.
We are aware that recent events are unsettling, particularly for victims and survivors of child sexual abuse and all those who are engaged with the inquiry's work. It has been said that the inquiry is in crisis. This is simply not the case.
After 2 years, the inquiry has yet to hear evidence in any of its 13 separate investigations into failing institutions, ranging from churches to councils to government itself. In that time, though, it's lost 3 chairwomen and now possibly its most senior lawyer. But the one thing that has remained are the inquiry's ambitious terms of reference.
When those terms of reference were set, they were agreed with victims and survivors. And it's victims and survivors who are at the heart of this inquiry. For too many years, too many people have been raising their voice, saying what has happened to them, and people have not been listening.
The inquiry is at pains to point out that this latest friction is not about its scope, but about the conduct of its chief lawyer. However, yet again, the central issue remains as to just what this multi-million-pound independent inquiry is supposed to be about, and whether it can really deliver justice to so many victims and so many survivors going back so many years. Channel 4 News understands that the current chair, Professor Alexis Jay, is nearing the end of a review that will determine the future of this beleaguered inquiry.
Simon Israel. And victims whose cases are being investigated by the independent inquiry into sexual abuse faced another blow today. With more on that, Ed Hauker is with me. He's been looking into the events at the Knollview Residential School in Rochdale for some time. Ed.
Well, so I've spoken to pupils from the Knollview Residential School today, and they're incredibly angry because Greater Manchester Police have decided to end their investigation looking into abuse allegations at the school. You may remember Knollview School was founded by Cyril Smith, and allegations have swirled that pupils there were abused in the 70s, 80s and 90s. Well, tonight and today, the CPS and Greater Manchester Police will bring charges against just one man. In the meantime, pupils feel incredibly upset about that, and their only hope, really, is that the independent inquiry into sexual abuse will examine their claims. That's the good news. But after today's news, I suppose it's the bad news as well. Cyril Smith looms large over Rochdale again tonight. After his death, Greater Manchester Police acknowledged the overwhelming evidence that the local MP had sexually and physically abused young boys and began investigating offences committed at Knoll View, a residential school for vulnerable boys that he was allowed to found. But the MP was not the only person alleged to have abused boys at the school. Internal council reports from the 1990s state that boys as young as 8 were sexually active, and that on one night another alleged abuser gained access to the school. The staff were not there, and he abused boys on the premises. Phil Taylor, a health worker, filed the first report, alarmed that boys were prostituting themselves in the town centre.
People were coming away from as far away as Yorkshire, Sheffield. They knew about what was going on, abusing these boys, and it was just continuing. It wasn't being stopped.
Today, Greater Manchester Police said they were dropping their investigation into Knoll View after referring allegations involving 27 suspects to the CPS. They say there is insufficient evidence to prosecute all but one man. Other alleged abusers are dead. A social worker at Knoll View says the pupils were failed, first by the school and again by police. Martin Deegan says it's now up to them to find justice.
If police inquiries can no longer continue wasting public money, then the individuals who've got cases with Slater and Gordon and other people, solicitors in Manchester and thereabouts, might now be able to take their cases to the High Court and be heard, and then this documentation will come out, and then the truth will come out, and then maybe, just maybe, there'll be some justice for the lads that are still alive, because remember, a number are dead.
Well, we're joined now from Edinburgh by Ian McFadden. He suffered abuse whilst a student at Caldecott School in Buckinghamshire and is a participant in this inquiry. And Labour MP Chukwuemeka, a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, who is also standing to be the committee's next chair. Ian McFadden, what's your reaction to what's happened today? It must feel like another hammer blow.
Well, John, I'm really very angry. I hear people who supposedly advocate for survivors saying that this is a hiccup. This is not a hiccup. This is a meltdown, and it's wholly unacceptable. You know, the inquiry may well be putting out press releases that they're not in crisis, but I can assure you, with the survivors that I've spoken to, they're in crisis with what's going on today.
Well, now, has your contact with this committee made any sense? Have you felt that it had a potential to deliver?
Well, I'm awaiting for my strand within the inquiry to be put forward so I can apply for core participant status. But you know, at this rate, the way we're going forward, I may well be drawing my pension quicker than I actually get core participant status.
Your very use of the phrase, I'm waiting for the strand, suggests it's an immensely complicated process even to line up what they're going to do.
It may well be, John, but none of this is rocket science. If we look towards Australia, Australia has an inquiry which is being regarded as really highly successful, and it's as complex and complicated as our inquiry. You know, if it needs to be broken down into smaller pieces, so be it, but the terms of references currently are non-negotiable.
Well, Chukwuemeka, that's really where you come in, because your committee is going to question the new chair of the Committee of Inquiry. And I'm wondering, do you feel the whole thing needs reconfiguring, or what?
I think there does need to be some reconfiguring. My principal interest in this is actually that many of the survivors from the Shirley Oak Survivors Group in your package are constituents of mine. So I've been following this now for the last couple of years. But for the inquiry to say, well, look, there isn't a crisis, it's not credible to suggest that this is a properly functioning inquiry. It's dysfunctional. When you lose 3 chairs, you're now on to your 4th. You lose your lead counsel. Well, he has been suspended. He was told he was suspended through learning of it by the internet. It doesn't seem he was told. You lose the second most senior lawyer, Elizabeth Prochaska, as well. It might not be a crisis, but it's incredibly dysfunctional. And I think that these short statements we've seen on the inquiry's website are not enough. Alexis Jay, the professor who is leading the inquiry, she is due to be giving evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee in the middle of October. But frankly, I think we need a much fuller statement from her as to what is going to happen with the lead counsel of the inquiry. Obviously, they're investigating that, but how long is he going to be suspended for? How does it affect the inquiry's work? Will the second lead counsel, Elizabeth Prochaska, who, by the way, actually it appears resigned effective from the 15th of September, we've only just learnt about it now, is somebody going to replace her? And then in terms of the overall structure, one of the things that Professor Jay's predecessor, Lewel Goddard, referred to was just the sheer size of it. And I think this is one of the reasons why perhaps a proper federal structure for the inquiry needs to be instituted, where we currently have 13 different investigations which are the subject of the inquiry. Well, why not turn those into 13 mini-inquiries with a proper named head who can lead for that part of the country that it refers to? So, for example, the one that's dealing with Lambeth, you could have a head of the inquiry for Lambeth, and then Professor Jay could lead coming up with the overall national recommendations and conclusions of the inquiry. That might help it make it a bit more manageable, and perhaps that's what she's looking into in her review.
But do you sense that these resignations and the suspension may be exactly about that, about how they go forward, how they structure going forward? And do you have a view on whether, for example, Mr. Emmerson should indeed be desuspended?
Well, I'm not sure it would be appropriate for me to comment on that without knowing exactly why he has been suspended. They deny, by the way, John, that the reason that he has left, well, he hasn't left, of course. The reason he's been suspended is because he disagrees with the whole way that the inquiry is being run. But, I mean, this investigation needs to happen very quickly. I mean, of course, for him, he is a Deputy High Court judge. If he's not seen as being fit conducting the inquiry, then for him personally, that has implications, which is why he has instructed lawyers to act on his behalf, it would seem, in respect of his suspension.
Well, Ian McFadden, what does it feel like as a survivor simply to have this extraordinary swirl going on at the top and really absolutely nothing changing in your life in the bottom?
Can I be wholly honest with you, John? I've been dealing with this inquiry for the last 2.5 years. It has consumed my life. There are a few people who I have met along the way. Ben Emmerson is one of them. He is a man who has all the skill set to be doing the job that he's been employed to do. People ask me, is this the establishment trying to undermine the credibility or the ability for this inquiry to step forward? 2 years ago, I would have said that they were conspiracy theorists who came up with this. Now, I'm beginning to doubt. You know, at what stage is this an independent inquiry? As far as I can understand, the Secretariat and the head of the Secretariat were ex-civil servants from the Home Office. One of them was an employee from Theresa May's office. You know, at what stage are we going to have an inquiry that's fit for survivors' purpose and that isn't going to keep re-traumatising people who were terribly abused in their childhood?
Ian McFadden, thank you very much indeed, and I'm sorry to put you through that, but thank you very much. And Tukura Muna, thank you very much indeed. We'll look to see what your committee comes up with next week. Kathy.
Thanks, John. Now, parents living around Oxford have been warned not to let their children walk alone after a teenage girl was abducted and raped on her way to school. The 14-year-old was walking down a busy